Marlowe Crane had learned to make herself invisible long before she arrived at Roosevelt High School. It was a skill she'd perfected over years of careful practice, the art of occupying space without claiming it, of moving through crowded hallways like water-finding paths between stones. Her mother had taught her this, though not intentionally, not through words, but through example during those difficult years after her father's death. Sometimes survival meant staying small. Sometimes it meant holding everything dangerous inside yourself until the world forgot you could ever be a threat. The September morning she first walked through Roosevelt's main entrance, Marlowe counted her steps from the parking lot to her locker. 247. She counted because counting kept her present, kept her from drifting back to the person she'd been in Phoenix before everything changed. The school smelled like floor wax and old textbooks and the particular mustiness of a building that had educated generations of students. Lockers lined the walls in institutional grey, each one tagged with years of stickers and scratched initials. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in that peculiar flatness that made everyone look slightly unwell. Through the windows at the end of the main hallway, she could see the football field where the athletics department was setting up for evening practice. She kept her head down those first days, learning the geography of Roosevelt, the way she'd once learned the layout of the dojo where she'd spent 5 years training before her mother made her promise to stop. The cafeteria sat on the east side of the building, always too loud, always smelling of whatever mystery meat the kitchen staff had heated in industrial quantities. The library occupied the west corner, 3 floors up, with windows that overlooked the courtyard where students gathered between classes. The gymnasium anchored the south end, connected to the main building by a covered walkway that smelled perpetually of chlorine from the adjacent pool. The computer lab, the art rooms, the music wing. Marlowe mapped it all with the same methodical attention she'd once applied to studying an opponent's stance. She noticed them on her 3rd day. It would have been impossible not to. They moved through Roosevelt's halls the way sharks move through water, with that particular confidence that comes from never having encountered meaningful resistance. The leader was named Vanessa Keller, and she was beautiful in the way that weapons are beautiful. All sharp edges and polished surfaces designed to cut. Tall, blonde, with the kind of bone structure that suggested Scandinavian ancestry and the kind of wardrobe that suggested parents who considered money a solution to every problem. She wore her position at the top of Roosevelt's social hierarchy like armor, every gesture calculated to remind everyone else of their place in the order she'd established. Her lieutenants flanked her like attendants to royalty. On her left walked Brianne Morrison, shorter but equally blonde, with a gymnast's compact build and a gymnast's precision in everything she did. Her father owned half the car dealerships in the county, a fact she mentioned with impressive frequency. On Vanessa's right moved Courtney Zhang, who'd transferred from some expensive private academy and still wore the attitude of someone who'd seen better. Dark hair cut into a severe bob, designer everything, and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Together, they formed a unit that had apparently ruled Roosevelt's social landscape since freshman year, and they showed no signs of relinquishing that power. Marlowe's first direct encounter with them came during lunch on Thursday of that first week. She'd found a table in the corner of the cafeteria, far from the central areas where the various cliques established their territories. She had a book open in front of her, Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian, because she'd always been drawn to darkness that at least admitted what it was, and a tray of food she wasn't really eating. The cafeteria noise crashed over her in waves, conversations, laughter, the scrape of chairs, the clatter of trays, the particular frequency of adolescent social dynamics playing out in real time. She felt their approach before she saw them. That old awareness that Master Chen had drilled into her during her final year of training. The ability to sense shifts in the space around you, to read the energy of approaching bodies. Marlowe didn't look up from her book, even as their shadows fell across her table. "You're in Taylor's seat," Vanessa said. Her voice had that particular quality of someone who'd never been genuinely challenged, who'd learned that stating things as facts made them true through sheer force of certainty. Marlowe did look up then, slowly, meeting Vanessa's gaze for exactly 2 seconds before looking away, long enough to acknowledge the statement, short enough to signal non-confrontation. "I didn't see a name," she said quietly, already gathering her things. The book slipped into her backpack, the tray lifted smoothly as she stood. "Now you do," Brienne added, and there was laughter from the surrounding tables. People were watching. People were always watching when Vanessa moved, tracking her the way you'd track weather systems that might determine whether your day would be pleasant or disastrous. Marlowe moved to another table without protest, finding a seat near the windows that overlooked the courtyard. Her heart rate hadn't changed. Master Chen would have been proud. 4 years ago, before her father's death, before the incident that had made her mother beg her to stop training, she would have responded differently. 4 years ago, she'd put a grown man in the hospital after he'd grabbed her mother outside a grocery store. 4 years ago, she'd been a different person, someone who'd earned a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu at 14 and had been training in Muay Thai for 3 years on top of that. Someone who'd competed, someone who'd won. But that was Phoenix. That was the old Marlowe. This Marlowe had made a promise to her mother, to her grandmother, to the memory of her father, who'd been the one to first bring her to Master Chen's gym when she was 9 years old. No more fighting, no more violence. A fresh start in a new city meant being a different person, meant leaving behind the girl who'd once broken a man's orbital bone with an elbow strike when he wouldn't let go of her mother's arm. So she ate her lunch by the window and watched the leaves beginning to turn in the courtyard trees, and she let the incident pass like water over stones. But it didn't stop there. It never stopped there. The following Monday, Vanessa bumped into her in the hallway between second and third period, not hard enough to knock Marlowe down, but hard enough to send her books scattering across the floor, while students flowed around them like a river around boulders. "Watch where you're going," Vanessa said, and kept walking, her companions laughing as they disappeared into the crowd. Marlowe knelt and gathered her books, her movements economical and efficient. Someone's foot accidentally kicked her calculus textbook further down the hall. Someone else stepped on her notebook. She retrieved everything without comment, without visible reaction, and made it to third period 2 minutes late. On Wednesday, she found her locker had been vandalized. Nothing permanent. Someone had used a dry erase marker to write "nobody" across the front in large, careful letters. She wiped it off with the sleeve of her jacket and didn't report it. Reporting would mean explaining, would mean drawing more attention, would mean administrative involvement that might lead to questions about her previous school, about Phoenix, about why exactly a family would move halfway across the country right before a student's final year. The pattern established itself over those first weeks with the predictability of physics. Every few days, some new small humiliation. Books knocked from her hands in passing. Whispered comments just loud enough for her to hear as she walked past. Her lunch tray accidentally jostled so that milk spilled across her food. Small things, deniable things. Things that individually meant nothing but collectively created an atmosphere of constant grinding pressure. Marlowe absorbed it all with the same careful neutrality. She'd learned this too, years ago, though for different reasons. In the dojo, Master Chen had taught them to remain calm under pressure, to never let an opponent see emotion that they could exploit. "The fighter who loses composure has already lost the fight," he'd said in his careful English, demonstrating how a grabbed wrist could become a joint lock if you simply remained relaxed and moved at the right angle. That training served her now, though in ways Master Chen probably never intended. She noticed things, though. That was another skill from her training. Awareness. The way Brienne always looked to Vanessa before committing to any action, seeking approval like a dog checking with its owner. The way Courtney's cruelty had a particularly sharp edge to it, as if she was proving something. The way other students watched these interactions, with expressions ranging from sympathy to relief that they weren't the target to guilty satisfaction that someone else was suffering. The teachers saw. That was the thing that bothered Marlowe most. Mr. Henderson in calculus, who'd looked away quickly when Vanessa had made a comment about Marlowe's thrift store clothes. Miss Patterson in English, who definitely heard Brienne's stage-whispered comment about charity cases, but had continued her lecture on Fitzgerald without pause. The counsellor, who'd smiled blandly when Marlowe had mentioned, carefully, vaguely, that she was having some trouble adjusting to Roosevelt and had suggested she try to make more friends, join some clubs. There was a careful ecosystem of willful blindness at Roosevelt, Marlowe realized. The students who bullied, the students who watched, the students who looked away, and the adults who maintained plausible deniability. Everyone playing their role in a system that persisted because changing it would require someone to take a risk, and risk meant potential consequences. By the third week of October, Marlowe had settled into a kind of grim routine. She arrived early before most students and went straight to her locker. She spent lunch periods in the library, where the elderly librarian, Mrs. Chen, no relation to Master Chen, but the coincidence had made Marlowe smile, maintained an atmosphere of enforced quiet that even Vanessa respected. She left immediately after final bell, walking the 8 blocks to the small apartment she shared with her mother, rather than waiting for a bus that would mean additional exposure to Roosevelt's social dynamics. Her mother worked double shifts as a nurse at County General, trying to rebuild the savings they'd burned through during the move and the difficult months before it. She came home exhausted, barely conscious enough to eat the dinner Marlowe prepared before falling into bed. She didn't ask questions about school, and Marlowe didn't offer information. What would she say? That she was being bullied? Her mother would want to get involved, would make things worse, would ask questions about why Marlowe didn't just defend herself, and then Marlowe would have to explain again about the promise, about Phoenix, about why they'd left. Some evenings, alone in the apartment, Marlowe would stand in her small bedroom and move through the forms Master Chen had taught her. Slowly, carefully, so the neighbors wouldn't hear. The kata from her karate foundation, the shadow boxing from her Muay Thai training, the hip escapes and shrimping movements from BJJ, performed on her bedroom floor with the carpet providing inadequate padding. She didn't think of it as training. She thought of it as maintenance, as keeping the machinery oiled even if she never planned to use it again. Her body remembered everything. The thousands of hours on the mats, the hundreds of rounds of sparring, the competitions where she'd fought girls and sometimes boys who outweighed her by 30 pounds. Her hands knew how to form proper fists, thumbs outside, wrist straight, impact with the first 2 knuckles. Her legs knew how to check a kick, how to deliver a teep that would stop an advancing opponent without damage. Her hips knew how to generate power for a cross, how to create frames in guard position, how to escape from mount. The knowledge sat in her muscles and bones like a second language she'd promised never to speak again. The 4th week brought a new development. His name was Desmond Wright, and he was everything Marlowe wasn't. Tall, confident, popular without being cruel, the kind of person who seemed to genuinely like other people and expected them to like him in return. He played point guard on the basketball team, maintained decent grades despite athletic commitments, and had that easy charisma that made teachers smile when he walked into their classrooms. He first spoke to her in AP Literature, where they'd been assigned adjacent seats by Ms. Patterson's alphabetical seating chart. The class was discussing Toni Morrison's Beloved, and Marlowe had made a comment about the function of memory as both preservation and trauma, about how the characters were haunted by what they couldn't forget. After class, as students filed out, Desmond had lingered. That was a really good point, he'd said, about memory being a weapon someone uses against themselves. Marlowe had looked at him with suspicion, searching for mockery or ulterior motive, but found only genuine interest. "Thanks," she'd said carefully. "You're new, right?" This year, he'd fallen into step beside her as they moved into the hallway. "I'm Desmond. Most people call me Des. Marlowe." "Like the detective?" Philip Marlowe. She'd been surprised. Most people didn't get the reference. "My dad was a fan of old noir novels." "Was?" The question had been gentle, not prying. "He died when I was 14. She didn't usually share this, but something about Desmond's openness made it easier to reciprocate. "I'm sorry." And he'd sounded like he meant it, which was rare. Most people got uncomfortable with death, changed the subject quickly, offered platitudes that meant nothing. Desmond just nodded and let the moment sit. They'd talked more over the following days, discovered they both liked the same obscure indie bands, both preferred old books to new ones, both had complicated relationships with their chosen high school existence. His because basketball demanded a version of himself that wasn't quite complete. Hers because she was trying to be someone she'd never been. He didn't ask intrusive questions, didn't push when she became vague about Phoenix, seemed to accept her at face value, which was such a rare gift that Marlowe found herself looking forward to AP Lit in ways she hadn't anticipated. By early November, they'd fallen into a pattern of eating lunch together. Not in the cafeteria, Marlowe still avoided that space when possible, but in the courtyard when weather permitted, or in an alcove near the music wing when it didn't. Desmond would bring food from the cafeteria and share it when Marlowe's packed lunch looked particularly meager. They'd talk about books, about music, about his aspirations to study psychology in college, about her vague plans to do something with writing, though she'd never shown anyone her work. It was during one of these lunches, sitting on the low wall that bordered the courtyard while November wind scattered leaves around their feet, that Desmond first noticed. Marlowe had dropped her phone, and her hand had shot out with speed that was instinctive and impossible to hide, catching it before it hit the ground. The movement had been pure reflex, the kind of hand-eye coordination that came from thousands of hours of training. Desmond had gone quiet, watching her. "That was really fast," he'd said carefully. Marlowe had felt ice in her chest. "Just got lucky." "No, I mean really fast, like training fast." He'd smiled then, trying to lighten the moment. "You secretly a ninja or something?" "Something like that," she'd said, attempting to make it a joke. But Desmond's eyes had shown curiosity now, a new awareness. She'd changed the subject quickly, and he'd let her. But something had shifted. He was paying attention now in a different way. The bullying had continued throughout these weeks, sometimes intensifying when Vanessa noticed Marlowe talking with Desmond. There was a clear hierarchy at Roosevelt, and Desmond occupied a position several strata above Marlowe's. His friendship with her was anomalous enough to draw attention, and attention from Vanessa was never positive. "Careful, Des," Vanessa had said one day, loud enough for half the hallway to hear. "You might catch whatever she has. Loser is contagious." Desmond had responded with surprising firmness. "That's enough, Vanessa." "Ooh, protective." "That's cute." She'd smiled at Marlowe then, and it was the smile of someone who'd just identified a new vulnerability to exploit. Got yourself a defender. How sweet. After that, things escalated. It wasn't just Marlowe they targeted now. It was the friendship itself. Comments about why would someone like Desmond waste time with someone like Marlowe. Speculation about whether it was pity or something more pathetic. Social media posts that Marlowe didn't see but heard about, photos of them talking with mocking captions, polls about whether Desmond had lost his mind. Desmond handled it with grace, that Marlowe envied. "Ignore them," he'd said. "Vanessa's just mad because her dad's never home and her mum's more interested in wine than her daughter. She takes it out on everyone else." "How do you know that?" "Small school. Everyone knows everything eventually. Doesn't excuse her being cruel, but it explains it." He'd looked at Marlowe seriously then. "You don't have to put up with her, you know. You could tell someone. Administration, your parents, someone." "It's fine," Marlowe had said automatically. "I can handle it." "I'm not sure you should have to." But what could she say? That she could handle it because she'd been trained to handle much worse. That she knew 17 different ways to make Vanessa stop talking, most of which would put the other girl in the hospital. That every time Vanessa pushed her, or Brienne knocked her books down, or Courtney made some cutting remark, Marlowe was running calculations about joint locks and striking angles and how quickly she could end the situation if she chose to. She said none of this, just smiled and changed the subject to the essay they had due in AP Lit. The first major incident came on a Friday in mid-November. The cafeteria was particularly crowded because rain had forced everyone inside during lunch. Marlowe had broken her usual pattern because Desmond had insisted they grab food together. He had a away game that night for basketball and wouldn't be able to meet their usual spot. They were in line together, Desmond talking about the game, when Vanessa materialized behind them with her entourage. "Well, well, the happy couple," she'd announced. "How adorable. Did you see them holding hands in the hallway, Bree?" "Totally saw it," Brienne confirmed, though Marlowe and Desmond had done no such thing. So romantic. "Vanessa, seriously, grow up," Desmond had said, his voice tight with irritation. "I'm just wondering what he sees in her, that's all. I mean, look at her." Vanessa had made a gesture encompassing Marlowe's entire existence. "Thrift store clothes, no friends, walks around like she's scared of her own shadow. Charity case is one thing, Des, but this is just sad." Marlowe had felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the old anger that she kept locked down deep. Her hands had wanted to curl into fists, proper fists, the kind Master Chen had taught her, but she'd kept them loose, kept her breathing steady. Don't react. Don't give them anything to use. Don't break the promise. "At least I don't have to tear other people down to feel good about myself," Marlowe had heard herself say. The words were out before she could stop them, quiet but clear. The cafeteria had gone noticeably quieter. Vanessa's expression had shifted from mocking amusement to genuine anger. "What did you just say?" "You heard me." Marlowe had met her eyes then, holding the gaze for longer than was wise. Something in her had broken, just slightly, some small dam giving way under months of pressure. "Oh, she's got some spine after all." Interesting. Vanessa had stepped closer, invading Marlowe's personal space with the confidence of someone who'd never been physically challenged. "Let me make something very clear, Charity Case. You don't talk to me like that. You don't talk to me at all. You stay in your lane, keep your head down, and maybe we'll let you finish out the year without making your life completely miserable. Got it?" Marlowe had wanted to explain about lanes and staying down and what happened when you pushed someone who'd spent years learning to push back. She'd wanted to explain about leverage and base, and how someone Vanessa's size would go down from a properly executed Osoto Gari like a demolished building. She'd wanted to show, rather than tell. But Desmond had put a gentle hand on her shoulder, and the touch had brought her back. "It's not worth it," he'd murmured. "Come on." They'd left the cafeteria line without getting food, Desmond steering her toward the exit, while Vanessa's laughter followed them. Outside, in the covered walkway that connected to the gym, Marlowe had been shaking, not with fear, with the effort of not acting on the dozen responses her training had offered. "You okay?" Desmond had asked. "Fine." That was pretty brave back there, standing up to her. Was it? Marlowe had looked at her hands, still trembling slightly. Feels more like stupid. She's just a bully. All talk, no substance. You know that, right? If only he knew how little substance you needed when you knew what you were doing, how much damage could be delivered with proper technique, how quickly a confrontation could end when one person had real training and the other just had confidence and a mean streak. "I know," Marlowe had said, because it was easier than explaining. But that night, alone in her apartment with her mother working another double shift, Marlowe had worked the heavy bag she'd hidden in her closet. She'd wrapped her hands carefully, habit from years of proper training, and spent an hour drilling combinations. Jab, cross, hook, cross. Teep followed by rear, roundhouse. Slip, counter, pivot. Each movement precise, controlled, performed with the technical excellence that came from muscle memory so deep it was practically genetic. She'd showered afterward, hands sore despite the wraps, and had stood in front of her bathroom mirror looking at herself. The same narrow face, the same dark eyes, the same shoulder-length black hair that she kept simple because elaborate styling felt like advertising you cared about things that could be taken away. She'd looked like a victim, she realized. She'd trained herself to look like a victim because looking dangerous would raise questions, would bring the kind of attention that might lead back to Phoenix and the incident that had made her mother cry for 3 days straight. But she was tired. God, she was so tired of being afraid. Not afraid of Vanessa. Vanessa was nothing, could be handled in seconds if Marlowe chose to act. Afraid of herself. Afraid of what she might do if she stopped holding back. Afraid of her mother's disappointment, afraid of breaking the promise to her father's memory. "I don't know how much longer I can do this," she'd whispered to her reflection. Her reflection had no answer. December arrived with the kind of cold that made the walks to and from school miserable. Marlowe bundled in layers, grateful for any excuse to hide behind fabric. The holidays approached with their particular brand of forced cheer, the school administration decorating hallways with construction paper snowflakes and organizing a winter formal that Marlowe had zero intention of attending. Her friendship with Desmond had deepened despite, or perhaps because of, the increasing harassment they both faced for it. They'd started texting at night, long conversations about everything and nothing. He told her about the pressure from his dad to get a basketball scholarship, about his dream of playing Division I even though he knew his skills were good but not exceptional. She told him carefully edited versions of her past, about Phoenix, about her father who died of a heart attack at 42, about the dojo where she'd trained though she left out the extent of her training, and the reasons she'd stopped. "You miss it?" he'd asked one night over text. "The martial arts thing?" "Every day," she'd typed back, and it was the truest thing she'd told anyone in months. "Why'd you stop?" She'd stared at the question for a long time before answering. "Made a promise to someone important." "That's noble." Also kind of sad. "Yeah." He'd sent back a heart emoji, which had made her smile despite everything. Desmond had this way of making things lighter without diminishing them, of acknowledging difficulty while still finding joy. She'd started to depend on it, on him, in ways that scared her because dependence meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant potential pain. The major incident happened on December 17th, a Friday afternoon when the school was emptying out for winter break. Marlowe had been walking to her locker after final period, thinking about the 2 weeks of relative peace ahead when she'd heard shouting from near the main entrance. She'd recognized Desmond's voice immediately, that edge of real anger cutting through his usual calm. By the time she'd reached the crowd that had gathered, her heart had been pounding with something that wasn't quite fear, but wasn't quite anything else either. Desmond was in Vanessa's face, not threatening but clearly furious. "That's completely out of line," he was saying. "You had no right." "I have every right," Vanessa shot back. "This is my school, not hers. She doesn't belong here, and someone needed to tell her." Marlowe had pushed through the crowd then and seen it. Her locker hung open, and someone, obviously Vanessa or her friends, had filled it with garbage. Literal garbage, cafeteria scraps, used napkins, something that might have been spoiled milk. The smell was horrific. But worse than the garbage were the photos plastered inside the locker door. Photos of Marlowe that had clearly been taken without her knowledge. Walking alone, eating lunch in the library, sitting by herself in the courtyard. Each photo had been defaced with cruel comments written in marker. Loser. Nobody. Waste of space. Kill yourself. The last one hit Marlowe like a physical blow. The casual cruelty of it, the assumption that her existence was worth so little that ending it was a reasonable suggestion. "This is harassment," Desmond was saying. "This is like illegal level harassment. I'm telling the principal." "You do that," Vanessa said, "and I'll tell them how your new little friend has been stalking me. How she's been following me around, taking pictures of me, how I feel unsafe around her. See who they believe, the charity case or the girl whose father funds half the programs at this school." "You're insane," Desmond said flatly. "I'm practical." "There's a difference." Vanessa had turned to Marlowe then, and her smile was triumphant. "See, nobody. That's your place. That's where you belong. In the garbage with the rest of the trash. The sooner you accept it, the easier this all gets." Marlowe had felt something crack inside her chest. Not break, crack, the way ice cracks before it shatters completely. She'd looked at Vanessa, really looked at her, and had catalogued everything. The way she stood, weight back on her heels with no base. The way she held her hands, loose and unprotected, the openness of her stance, the exposure of her center line, how easy it would be to step in, control the neck, deliver a knee to the solar plexus that would drop her without causing permanent damage. How satisfying it would be to watch that confident expression transform into shock and pain and fear. "Marlowe," Desmond had said quietly, and she'd realized she'd been standing absolutely still, her body having unconsciously shifted into a ready position that would look like nothing to untrained eyes, but that Master Chen would have recognized immediately. "Let's just go. We'll report this. They'll have to do something." But they wouldn't. Marlowe had known it with absolute certainty. Vanessa was right about the power dynamics at Roosevelt. Her father's money bought protection, bought benefit of doubt, bought the kind of immunity that let her do whatever she wanted to, whoever she wanted, as long as she was clever about it. "Yeah," Marlowe had heard herself say. "Let's go." They'd walked away together while Vanessa's laughter echoed behind them, while other students pulled out phones to photograph Marlowe's violated locker, while the evidence of her humiliation was documented and would undoubtedly be spread across social media before the afternoon ended. In the school parking lot, Desmond had turned to her. "Are you really okay?" "No," Marlowe had said honestly, "but I will be. We can fight this. My mum's a lawyer. She'd help." "Des." Marlowe had put a hand on his arm, feeling the warmth of him through his jacket. "I appreciate it. I really do. But some fights aren't worth having the way you're thinking." "What does that mean?" "It means I need to figure some things out. Over break. And then we'll see." He'd looked at her with concern and something else. A flicker of understanding, maybe, or recognition that there were things about her he didn't fully know. "Okay, but Marlowe, you're not garbage. You know that, right? You're not any of the things she says." "I know." And she did. That had never been the issue. The issue was what she was, not what she wasn't. The issue was the weapon she'd been carefully keeping sheathed, and whether it was finally time to acknowledge that sometimes weapons existed for a reason. They'd said goodbye, promised to text over break. Marlowe had walked the 8 blocks home through December cold, that bit at exposed skin, had let herself into the empty apartment, had stood in her room and looked at her reflection again. "What would you do?" she'd asked her father's memory. "What would you tell me?" But her father wasn't there to answer, and her mother was at work for another 6 hours, and Marlowe was alone with a choice that felt both impossible and inevitable. She'd pulled the heavy bag from her closet, had wrapped her hands properly, the way her first instructor had taught her when she was 9, had spent 2 hours working, not maintaining anymore, but training, truly training, pushing her cardio, drilling techniques, running through scenarios. Her body had remembered everything, responded with efficiency that came from muscle memory so ingrained it might as well have been instinct. And when she'd finished, when she'd showered and made dinner and sat alone in the quiet apartment, Marlowe had made a decision. Not about revenge. Revenge was crude, unsatisfying, the tool of people who didn't understand that true power came from control rather than chaos. But about dignity, about boundaries, about the difference between avoiding conflict and being a victim. The promise she'd made to her mother, to her grandmother, to her father's memory. That promise had been about not being violent, about not being someone who hurt people. But there was a difference, she realized, between being violent and being capable of violence, between hurting people and being able to protect yourself, between being a victim and simply choosing peace until peace was no longer possible. She'd spent winter break training properly for the first time in 2 years. Her mother had been working overtime for the holidays, barely home, and Marlowe had used the time. Running in the early mornings despite the cold, building back the cardio she'd lost, working the heavy bag every evening, regaining the conditioning in her shins and fists, drilling techniques on her bedroom floor, running through the fundamental movements of BJJ that had once been as natural as breathing, shadow boxing, practicing the Muay Thai combinations that had once made her dangerous. But more than physical training, she'd been planning, thinking through scenarios, remembering lessons from Master Chen about more than just technique. The fight is won before it begins, he'd always said. Through preparation, through awareness, through understanding your opponent better than they understand themselves. Vanessa was powerful at Roosevelt because of social dynamics, because of money, because of the ecosystem that enabled her. But strip away those advantages, create the right circumstances, and what was she? Just another untrained person who'd never faced real resistance, who'd never learned that confidence without competence was just arrogance waiting to be corrected. Marlowe had thought through it carefully. Returning to school with some dramatic transformation would be counterproductive, would raise questions, would alert Vanessa that something had changed. Better to continue as she had been, to maintain the appearance of the quiet victim while preparing for the inevitable escalation. Because Vanessa would escalate. That was the nature of bullying when the victim didn't properly submit. It always escalated until either the victim broke completely or the bully found a new target. Only this time, when Vanessa escalated, she was going to encounter something she'd never experienced before. Not violence. Marlowe had no intention of starting a fight, but the absolute certainty that she could end one. The presence that came from knowing beyond any doubt that you were not the weak link in the chain. And if Vanessa pushed far enough, if she created a situation where Marlowe had justifiable cause to defend herself, well, then Marlowe would educate her about the difference between the appearance of weakness and actual weakness. Would teach her, gently, because Marlowe wasn't cruel, about what real strength looked like. She'd texted with Desmond throughout the break. He'd sent pictures from his family's Christmas celebrations, from pick-up basketball games with friends, from the dinner where his father had apparently gotten drunk and told embarrassing stories about Desmond's childhood. She'd sent back carefully curated responses, maintaining the connection while protecting him from the full weight of what she was planning. "You seem different," he'd texted one night between Christmas and New Year's. "How so?" "Can't explain it. Just a feeling. Like you're more, I don't know, present. Is that weird?" "Not weird," she'd typed. "Maybe I'm just tired of being invisible." "You were never invisible to me." The message had made her chest ache with something that might have been affection or gratitude or fear, that she was going to somehow lose this connection with someone who'd shown her uncomplicated kindness when she'd needed it most. Thanks, Des. That means more than you know. See you in January? See you in January. School resumed on January 6th, a Monday that arrived with fresh snow and the particular dread that came with returning to a place that had become hostile territory. Marlowe had walked through Roosevelt's doors that morning with her head up instead of down. Not dramatically different. She wasn't advertising the change, but enough that she felt it in her posture, in the straightness of her spine, in the way she met people's eyes instead of avoiding them. She'd felt different. The training had done more than restore her physical capabilities. It had restored something psychological that she'd lost when she'd made herself small, the confidence that came from competence, the calm that came from knowing you could handle whatever came at you. Desmond had noticed immediately. He'd found her at her locker that morning, and his greeting had been followed by a careful, "You okay? You seem different." "I'm good," Marlowe had said, and meant it. Really good, actually. "Winter break was good to you?" Something like that. She'd smiled at him, and his expression had shifted. Pleasure mixed with something that looked like attraction, and that was new, that was something to consider later, when she had time to process what it might mean. The first confrontation with Vanessa had come during lunch. Marlowe had been sitting in the courtyard with Desmond. They'd returned to their usual spot, despite the January cold, when Vanessa and her friends had materialized. Same pattern, same power play, except this time when Vanessa had made some comment about the happy couple and suggested Desmond was slumming it, Marlowe had responded. "Is it exhausting?" she'd asked, her voice conversational. Vanessa had blinked. "Is what exhausting?" "Being so miserable that you have to make everyone else miserable too. Seems like it would take a lot of energy." The courtyard had gone quiet. Desmond had made a small noise that might have been concern. Vanessa's expression had shifted through surprise into anger. "You want to say that again?" "I think you heard me." Marlowe had met her eyes steadily, no longer looking away after 2 seconds, just holding the gaze, calm and present and absolutely unintimidated. Vanessa had stepped closer, probably expecting Marlowe to retreat. She hadn't. Had just stood there, weight distributed evenly, hands loose at her sides, breathing steady. Not aggressive, just solidly, immovably there. "You're making a mistake," Vanessa had said quietly. "A big mistake." "Maybe, but at least I won't have to live with being the kind of person who needs to hurt other people to feel powerful. That's something." Vanessa's hand had twitched, and for a moment Marlowe had thought she might actually throw a punch. Part of her, a part she wasn't proud of, had hoped for it. But Vanessa had held back, had just smiled that cold smile and said, "This isn't over. I didn't think it was." After they'd left, Desmond had turned to her with an expression of mingled concern and amazement. "What was that?" "That was me being tired of backing down." "Marlowe, they're going to come after you harder now." "You know that, right?" "I know." She'd looked at him seriously then. "Des, I need to tell you something. I'm not who you think I am. Not completely. What does that mean?" "It means I have training, real training, in martial arts. I stopped because of some things that happened in Phoenix, but I never forgot. And I'm tired of pretending to be helpless when I'm not." Desmond had processed this for a long moment. "How much training are we talking about?" "Black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, 3 years of Muay Thai, some boxing, some wrestling. I competed. I won." She'd watched his face carefully. "My dad got me into it when I was a kid. After he died, I kind of threw myself into it harder. Got really good. Too good, maybe. I hurt someone. Someone who deserved it, but I still hurt them badly enough that it scared me. Scared my mom. We moved here to get away from that, and I promised not to fight anymore. But now I think there's a difference between fighting and defending yourself. And I'm done being a victim." Desmond had smiled then, and it had been genuine. "Honestly, that's kind of awesome, but also terrifying. Vanessa has no idea what she's dealing with. That's what I'm counting on." The escalation had come exactly as Marlowe had predicted. Vanessa couldn't let the courtyard confrontation stand without response. Her entire social position was built on being unchallengeable. So she'd planned something bigger, something public, something designed to utterly destroy Marlowe's dignity and reinforce who held power at Roosevelt. It had happened on Friday, January 24th. Marlowe had been in the hallway between classes when Vanessa and her friends had cornered her near the bathroom. Students were everywhere. It was passing period, the halls crowded, everyone moving between rooms. "Hold her," Vanessa had said, and before Marlowe could react, Brianne and Courtney had grabbed her arms. They'd pinned her against the wall, and Marlowe's first instinct had been to respond with technique, break the grips, control their balance, put them on the ground. She'd held back, curious now, wanting to see how far Vanessa would actually go. Vanessa had produced scissors from her bag. Regular school scissors, but the intent had been immediately clear. "You think you're special now," Vanessa had said quietly, just for Marlowe. "You think because you stood up to me once that anything's changed. Let me show you what happens to people who forget their place." And then, while other students watched and while Marlowe stood pinned between Brianne and Courtney, Vanessa had grabbed a handful of Marlowe's hair and cut. The scissors had been dull, the cut jagged, and Marlowe had felt chunks of hair falling away, felt the violation of it more than any punch would have registered. Vanessa had worked quickly, cutting away significant sections before Marlowe had processed what was happening. By the time teachers had arrived, someone must have gone for help. Marlowe's hair had been butchered, chunks missing on both sides, the back cut unevenly, what had been shoulder length now destroyed into something that looked like she'd lost a fight with a lawnmower. The teachers had pulled Vanessa away, had separated everyone involved, had rushed them all to the office. In the aftermath, sitting in the assistant principal's office with her mother called from work and Vanessa's father summoned from wherever wealthy men went during business hours, Marlowe had touched her destroyed hair and felt something settle into absolute clarity. This wasn't about teaching Vanessa a lesson anymore. This wasn't about standing up for herself or breaking free from victim status. This was about demonstrating publicly, undeniably, that actions had consequences. That you could push someone only so far before they reminded you that they were a person, not a target. The meeting in the assistant principal's office had been a masterclass in the casual cruelty of institutional power. Vanessa's father, Mr. Nigella, had arrived in an expensive suit and an expression of barely concealed annoyance that his time was being wasted. He'd listened to the assistant principal's recounting of events with obvious impatience, had glanced at Marlowe's destroyed hair with something that might have been disdain, and had said, "This seems like teenage drama blown out of proportion." "Your daughter assaulted another student," Marlowe's mother had said. She was still in her scrubs from the hospital, exhausted from an overnight shift, but her voice had been steady. "She physically restrained my daughter and cut her hair without consent. That's assault." "That's a prank," Mr. Keller had corrected. "Perhaps in poor taste, but hardly assault. Girls this age are always doing things to each other's hair." The assistant principal, a tired-looking man named Mr. Hammond, who clearly wanted to be anywhere but in this meeting, had attempted diplomacy. "Mr. Keller, multiple students witnessed the incident. Your daughter will need to face some consequences. She's already missed 2 class periods sitting in this office." "I'd say that's consequence enough." Mr. Keller had produced his phone, checked something, looked up. Now, if there's nothing else, I have actual work to attend to. Vanessa, let's go." And that had been it. Vanessa had received a verbal warning, a note in her file that would mean nothing, and a suggestion that she be more mindful of other students' boundaries. No suspension, no real punishment. Just another reminder that at Roosevelt High School, like most places, money bought different rules. Marlowe had sat in that office and watched it happen, had felt her mother's hand tight on her shoulder, had processed the casual dismissal of what had been done to her, and she'd made a decision. On the drive home, her mother had been quietly furious. "We can transfer you," she'd said. "Find another school. This place is toxic." "No," Marlowe had said. "I'm not running away again." "Then what?" "Because clearly the administration isn't going to protect you." "I'll protect myself." Her mother had pulled into their apartment complex parking lot and turned to look at Marlowe. Really look at her. "What does that mean?" "It means I'm tired of promises that made sense 2 years ago but don't make sense now. It means that man in Phoenix grabbed you and I stopped him, and that was the right thing to do even if it scared us both. It means sometimes you have to stand up for yourself, even if standing up means showing people the parts of yourself you've been hiding." "Marlowe, I'm not going to hurt anyone, Mom. I promise. But I'm also not going to keep being hurt. There's a difference, and I need you to trust me to know it." They'd sat in the car for a long moment, engine ticking as it cooled, the January afternoon grey and cold around them. Finally, her mother had nodded. "Your father would have said the same thing." "I know. Be careful. Please." "I will." That evening, Marlowe had called Desmond, had explained what had happened, listening to his shocked curses and expressions of outrage. "This is insane," he'd said. "She can't just get away with that." "She can," she did. "The system protects people like her." "Then what are you going to do?" "I'm going to go back to school on Monday. And I'm going to show Vanessa that there are consequences the system can't protect her from." "Meaning?" "Meaning if she wants to keep pushing me, she's going to find out exactly who she's been pushing." "Marlowe, you're kind of scaring me." "Good. Maybe you can help Vanessa understand she should be scared too." "Are you asking me to warn her?" "I'm asking you to make sure everyone knows. I'm done being quiet. I'm done backing down. And if Vanessa comes at me again, she's going to get a response she's not prepared for." Desmond had been quiet for a moment, then, "For what it's worth, I've got your back. Whatever happens." "That means everything, Des." "Really?" That weekend, Marlowe had gone to a salon and had her butchered hair fixed as much as possible. The stylist, a woman with impressive purple highlights and sympathetic eyes, had listened to the story and had done what she could. The result was much shorter than Marlowe's hair had been, cut into a sharp, efficient style that actually looked intentional rather than vandalized. When Marlowe had looked at herself in the salon mirror, she'd barely recognized her reflection. The shorter hair made her face look different, stronger somehow, more angular, less like someone to overlook. "You look fierce," the stylist had said. "Whoever did this to you should be worried." "They will be," Marlowe had promised. Monday morning she'd walked into Roosevelt with her head high and her new haircut marking her like a flag. Students had stared, conversations had stopped, people had pulled out phones to photograph the evidence of what had been done to her, or maybe to capture her response to it. Vanessa and her friends had been waiting near the main entrance, clearly expecting Marlowe to arrive embarrassed, humiliated, maybe hiding under a hat. Instead, Marlowe had walked straight past them toward her locker without breaking stride. "Nice haircut, Charity Case," Vanessa had called after her. "Really suits you. Makes you look like the boy you probably are inside." Marlowe had stopped, turned slowly, met Vanessa's eyes with absolute calm. "Thank you," she'd said clearly. "I actually like it. Feels lighter, easier to maintain, Turns out you did me a favor." The hallway had gone quiet. Vanessa's expression had flickered. That wasn't the response she'd been expecting. "You know what else feels lighter?" Marlowe had continued, her voice carrying in the sudden silence. "Not caring what you think anymore. Not worrying about staying quiet or invisible or whatever I thought would make this easier. You wanted me to be scared. Instead, you freed me from giving a shit about your opinion. So again, thank you." She'd walked away then, leaving Vanessa standing with her friends while other students whispered and stared. The dynamic had shifted in some fundamental way, and everyone could feel it. That day passed without major incident, but the tension was palpable. Marlowe moved through her classes with a presence she hadn't had before, something in her body language that read differently to people who paid attention. Desmond noticed. "You seem coiled," he'd said at lunch, "like you're ready for something." "I am. What if she doesn't do anything? What if she backs off now?" "She won't. She can't. She's built her entire identity here on being unchallengeable. If she lets me walk away from this, every person she's ever bullied is going to realize she's just a regular person who's been getting away with things because nobody stopped her. And you're going to stop her? If she gives me cause. Yes. This feels bigger than just bullying now." "It is. It's about proving that there are consequences for the things you do to people. That you can't just hurt someone and walk away because your father has money. That power isn't about how much you can intimidate people. It's about what you're actually capable of when pushed." Desmond had looked at her seriously. "I really hope you know what you're doing. I've been training for this my entire life. I just didn't know what I was training for." The confrontation Marlowe had been preparing for came on Wednesday after school. She'd been in the parking lot, walking toward the street, when she'd heard the voices behind her. Vanessa and her entire group, not just Brienne and Courtney, but several others who'd apparently been recruited for whatever Vanessa had planned. "Hold up, Charity Case," Vanessa had called. "We're not done talking." Marlowe had turned slowly, taking in the situation, 8 of them surrounding her in a loose circle. They were in the parking lot but not visible from the school entrance. Whoever was left inside wouldn't see what happened here. A few other students were around, but they were keeping their distance, not wanting to get involved, but morbidly curious about what would happen. Perfect, actually. This was exactly what Marlowe had needed, a clear situation where she was outnumbered, where defending herself would be obviously justified, where whatever happened would be witnessed and documented. "What do you want, Vanessa?" Marlowe had asked calmly. "An apology would be nice, for your little performance in the hallway Monday, for thinking you could just talk back to me like we're equals." "We are equals." No, we're really not." Vanessa had stepped closer, and her friends had tightened the circle. "See, I've been patient with you. I've tried to help you understand your place here, but you don't seem to get it. So maybe it's time for a more direct lesson." "Careful," Marlowe had said quietly. "You're about to make a mistake you can't take back." "Oh, I'm scared," Vanessa had mocked. "What are you going to do, Charity Case?" "Fight all of us. If I have to." That had gotten laughter from Vanessa's friends. The idea was absurd to them. This quiet, formally passive girl fighting 8 of them. Someone pulled out a phone to record, probably expecting to capture Marlowe's continued humiliation. "Last chance," Vanessa had said. "Apologize. Mean it. Get on your knees and admit you're nothing, and maybe we'll let you walk away with just a few bruises." Marlowe had felt the old calm settling over her, the state Master Chen had called Mushin, empty mind. No fear, no anger, no emotion at all. Just perfect awareness of the situation, of the bodies around her, of the space and timing and angles that would matter in the next few seconds. "No," she'd said simply. Vanessa had lunged first, reaching for Marlowe's jacket, probably intending to shove her down. It was amateurish, telegraphed, slow as honey to someone who'd spent years training with people who actually knew how to fight. Marlowe had stepped offline, just a small shift of weight, a turn of hips, and Vanessa's momentum had carried her past. Marlowe had caught her wrist in passing, not hard, just enough to guide and redirect, and Vanessa had stumbled forward off balance. The circle had gone quiet. That hadn't looked like luck. Brienne had tried next, coming from behind, trying to grab Marlowe in a hold. Marlowe had sensed the approach, peripheral vision, plus that old awareness, and had ducked under the reaching arms, pivoted, created distance. Brienne's hands had closed on empty air, while Marlowe had moved to the outside of the circle, refusing to stay surrounded. "What the hell?" Courtney had said, and there had been uncertainty in her voice now. "I tried to warn you," Marlowe had said calmly. "I don't want to fight. But I can. Please just walk away." But Vanessa's pride wouldn't allow it. Not now, not in front of everyone, not with phones recording. "Get her!" she'd snarled, and 3 of them had rushed Marlowe at once. What happened next had been pure instinct, pure muscle memory, the result of thousands of hours of training that Marlowe's body had never forgotten. The first girl, someone Marlowe didn't even know, had reached for her, and Marlowe had executed a textbook osotogari, the major outer reap from judo. She'd stepped in, controlled the collar and sleeve, used the girl's own momentum to sweep her supporting leg, and guided her down to the asphalt. Not hard enough to injure, but firmly enough to take her out of the fight. The second attacker had grabbed Marlowe's arm, and Marlowe had immediately applied a wrist lock, controlling the joint with precise pressure that made the girl cry out and release. A gentle push, and she'd stumbled back, no longer interested in continuing. The third had actually tried to punch, which was almost refreshing. At least it was an honest attack. Marlowe had slipped the punch with minimal movement, classic boxing defense, and had countered with a teep to the midsection. Not hard, just enough push to create distance and make the girl double over. The kick had been picture-perfect, her shin connecting with the solar plexus in a way that emptied the lungs without causing damage. In less than 10 seconds, 3 of Vanessa's friends were on the ground or backing away, and Marlowe had barely moved. She'd stayed calm, controlled, efficient, each technique precisely what was needed and nothing more. The parking lot had gone absolutely silent, except for the sounds of the downed girls catching their breath. Everyone was staring. Phones were definitely recording now, capturing everything. "Anyone else?" Marlowe had asked quietly. No one moved. The remaining girls looked to Vanessa, but Vanessa looked uncertain for the first time since Marlowe had met her. She was processing what she'd just seen, trying to reconcile the quiet victim she'd been tormenting with the person who'd just neutralized 3 attackers with surgical precision. You can't," Vanessa had started. "I can. I have been able to this entire time. I just chose not to." Marlowe had met Vanessa's eyes steadily. "I've been trying to avoid this, Vanessa, all year, but you wouldn't let it end. You just kept pushing and pushing until you forced me to show you who I actually am." "What are you?" Brienne had whispered. "Someone you shouldn't have fucked with." The crowd that had gathered was growing, other students drawn by the commotion, some who'd come from inside the school. Marlowe could see Mr. Henderson, her calculus teacher, pushing through to see what was happening. She needed to finish this before adult intervention complicated things. "Vanessa," Marlowe had said clearly, "you have a choice. Right now, walk away. Leave me alone. Stop bullying people, because eventually you're going to target someone who can't defend themselves, and someone else is going to have to step in." Or what? But Vanessa's voice had lacked its usual confidence. "Or I demonstrate exactly how much I've been holding back, how many ways I know to make you stop. And trust me, there are a lot of them, and none of them are things you want to experience." It should have ended there. Marlowe had given Vanessa an out, a chance to preserve some dignity and walk away, A smart person would have taken it, but Vanessa's entire identity was bound up in being unchallengeable, and she couldn't accept this public demonstration of her weakness. So Vanessa had done the worst possible thing. She'd pulled out her phone, had taken a picture of Marlowe, and had said, "You're going to regret this. I'm going to make sure everyone knows what you are. A violent psycho who attacked us for no reason. My father will have you expelled, arrested, whatever it takes." And that had been the line. The moment where Marlowe's patience had finally completely exhausted itself. "No," Marlowe had said quietly. "You won't. Because everyone here saw what happened. Everyone here has been watching you bully me for months. Everyone here knows exactly who started this and why. And if you try to twist it, if you try to use your father's money to turn this into something it's not, then I stop being nice about how I defend myself." She'd stepped forward then, closing the distance between them until she was directly in Vanessa's space. Not touching, not threatening, just present in a way that made her point clear. Vanessa had instinctively stepped back, and that single backward step had said everything. She was scared now, genuinely scared. Faced with someone who wasn't intimidated by her money or her position or anything else about her. "You cut my hair," Marlowe had said quietly. "You humiliated me in front of the entire school. You've spent months making my life miserable. And I let you, because I thought avoiding conflict was the right thing to do. But you know what I realized? Avoiding conflict doesn't work when the other person is determined to create it. Sometimes you have to show people there are consequences. Vanessa had started. You'll apologize, right now, in front of everyone, for everything you've done, and then you'll leave me alone, and you'll leave every other person you've been tormenting alone, and you'll learn to be a decent human being. Or what?" Marlowe had let her stance shift, just slightly. Weight more evenly distributed. Hands coming up just a fraction. Everything about her body language had suddenly read as dangerous to anyone paying attention, and everyone was paying attention now. "Or I stop showing restraint, and trust me, Vanessa, you don't want to see what that looks like." The parking lot had been absolutely silent. Mr. Henderson had reached the edge of the circle, but hadn't intervened, maybe because he could see that despite everything, Marlowe hadn't actually started a fight. She'd defended herself, precisely and proportionally, against people who'd attacked her first. That was legal. That was justified. That was self-defense. Vanessa had looked around, clearly searching for support, but none of her friends were meeting her eyes. They'd all seen what Marlowe was capable of now. They'd all felt the shift in power dynamics. Whatever hold Vanessa had had over them through fear or social manipulation had been broken by the simple demonstration that she wasn't the most dangerous person in the room. "This isn't fair," Vanessa had said. And incredibly, her voice had cracked, actual emotion showing through for the first time. "You're not supposed to. You can't just what? Defend myself, have skills you didn't know about, refuse to be your victim anymore." Marlowe had shaken her head. "You created this, Vanessa. You pushed someone you knew nothing about until they had no choice but to push back. That's on you." And then, to Marlowe's genuine surprise, Vanessa had started crying. Not theatrical crying meant to manipulate, but real tears of frustration and fear, and the overwhelming realization that she'd badly miscalculated. Her carefully constructed armor of confidence had shattered, and underneath it was just a teenager who'd been using cruelty to mask her own insecurities. "I'm sorry," Vanessa had whispered, then louder, looking at the crowd. "I'm sorry, okay? I'm sorry for cutting your hair, for bullying you, for all of it. Just please—" She'd looked at Marlowe with something like desperation. "Please don't hurt me." And there it was. The moment Marlowe had been unconsciously heading toward since December. The moment where she had all the power, all the control, where she could deliver any consequence she wanted and everyone would understand it as justified. She could humiliate Vanessa the way she'd been humiliated, could demonstrate her skills more thoroughly, could put Vanessa on the ground and make her feel helpless and small, could become everything she'd been trying not to be, could let the old anger and the old training combine into something that would satisfy that deep desire for payback. Master Chen's voice had spoken in her memory. The true martial artist seeks to avoid conflict, to protect rather than to harm. When you must fight, you fight with precision and restraint. Victory without honor is meaningless. Victory without humanity is defeat. Marlowe had looked at Vanessa crying in front of everyone, had seen the mask completely stripped away, and had felt pity and maybe understanding. Because hadn't Marlowe herself spent years hiding behind a mask? Hadn't she been living as someone she wasn't, concealing her real self out of fear? Vanessa was terrible, had been cruel and vicious and deserved consequences. But standing there in that parking lot with phones recording and students watching and teachers finally intervening, Marlowe had realized that the best consequence wasn't violence or revenge. It was mercy that Vanessa would have to live with, forgiveness that would haunt her more than any beating could. "I accept your apology," Marlowe had said clearly. And then, more quietly, just for Vanessa, "But you need help. The kind of help that isn't about money or power or hurting other people. Whatever made you this way, you need to deal with it." Vanessa had nodded, still crying, unable to speak. Mr. Henderson had finally stepped in then, separating everyone, asking what had happened. Multiple students had immediately volunteered explanations, all of them corroborating the same basic story. Vanessa and her friends had surrounded Marlowe, had threatened her, had attacked first. Marlowe had only defended herself. The videos on everyone's phones would prove it. In the principal's office afterward, with parents called and statements taken, the administration had had no choice but to acknowledge what had happened. Too many witnesses, too much evidence. Even Mr. Keller's money couldn't twist it into something it wasn't. Vanessa had received a week's suspension for assault. Her friends who'd participated had gotten various consequences. And Marlowe had been cleared of any wrongdoing, her actions officially recognized as self-defense. "You showed remarkable restraint," Principal Morris had said privately, after everything was settled. "Most people in that situation would have done much more damage than you did." "I wasn't trying to damage anyone," Marlowe had said honestly. "I was just trying to make it stop." "Well, you succeeded. I don't think Miss Keller will be bothering you again, and I suspect the atmosphere at Roosevelt might be different going forward." He'd been right. The aftermath of the parking lot incident had rippled through Roosevelt's social ecosystem like a stone dropped in still water. Marlowe hadn't suddenly become popular. She'd never wanted that. But the casual cruelty that had characterized so much of the school's culture had dampened noticeably. Students who'd been bullied found their tormentors suddenly less confident, less assured that their behavior would go unchallenged. Several people had approached Marlowe in the days after the incident. Some to thank her for standing up to Vanessa, some to apologize for not intervening when they'd witnessed Marlowe being bullied, some just to ask where she'd learned to fight like that. Could she teach them? Did she give lessons? She'd answered politely but vaguely, not wanting to become known as that martial arts girl, any more than she'd wanted to be known as that victim. She was just Marlowe, just a person trying to exist in peace, who happened to have skills she'd rather not use, but would, if necessary. The most unexpected conversation had come from Courtney Zhang, who'd found Marlowe in the library during lunch 2 weeks after the incident. "Can I talk to you?" she'd asked hesitantly. Marlowe had looked up from her book, Dostoevsky this time, because when the world was complicated, Russian literature somehow made it more bearable. "Sure." Courtney had sat down across from her, looking uncomfortable. I wanted to apologize. For everything. For going along with Vanessa. For participating in bullying you. For not stopping her when she was planning to cut your hair. Okay. That's it? Just okay? What do you want me to say? Marlowe had asked, not unkindly. You apologized, I accepted. What happens now is up to you. I don't know how to be different. Vanessa was... Courtney had struggled for words. She made everything make sense, like if you were part of her group, you had a place, you mattered. Without that, I don't know who I'm supposed to be. Then maybe use this as a chance to figure it out, without needing to hurt other people to feel like you matter. Courtney had nodded slowly. For what it's worth, I think you're really brave. And I'm sorry it took you having to physically defend yourself for me to realize what we were doing was wrong. Better late than never, I guess. They talked a bit more carefully, two people trying to find some kind of understanding across a divide created by months of cruelty. It hadn't been friendship, probably never would be, but it was something more human than what had come before. Vanessa herself had been a different story. She'd returned from her suspension visibly changed, quieter, less certain of her place in the world. She'd avoided Marlowe entirely, eating lunch at different times, taking different routes through the hallways. Her friends, former friends maybe, had largely drifted away, no longer finding safety or benefit in her proximity. 3 weeks after the incident, Marlowe had found a note in her locker. Just a piece of paper, folded with Marlowe written on the outside in careful handwriting. Inside it had read, I know you probably don't want to hear from me. I know I don't deserve your attention, but I wanted you to know that I'm seeing a therapist now. My parents made me after the suspension, but I'm actually trying to engage with it. She's helping me understand some things about why I was the way I was, about my dad never being satisfied with anything I do, about feeling like I had to control other people because I couldn't control anything in my own life. None of that excuses what I did to you. Nothing excuses it. But I wanted you to know I'm trying to be better. Not for you. I don't expect forgiveness or friendship or anything from you. Just for myself. So I can maybe be someone I don't hate when I look in the mirror. Thank you for not destroying me when you could have. I'll never forget that mercy. Vanessa Marlowe had read the note twice, then had tucked it into her backpack. She hadn't responded. Maybe she would eventually, or maybe the note itself was response enough. Acknowledgement that she'd received it. That Vanessa's attempts at growth were noted, even if they didn't change the past. Her relationship with Desmond had evolved through all of this. The crisis had clarified something that had been building since November. After the parking lot incident, after everything had settled, he'd asked her to the winter formal they'd both previously planned to skip. I mean, if you want to, he'd added quickly. No pressure. I just thought after everything, maybe it would be nice to do something normal, something that's about us, not about all the rest of it. Marlowe had considered. She'd never been to a school dance, had never imagined herself as the kind of person who did things like that. But maybe that was the point. Maybe part of reclaiming her life meant doing things she'd previously thought weren't for her. I'd like that, she'd said, but I don't have anything to wear. Neither do I. We can figure it out together. The dance had been everything high school dances were supposed to be. Overly decorated gym, mediocre music, chaperones trying to enforce spacing rules that nobody followed, students dressed in varying degrees of formal wear. Marlowe had found a simple black dress at a thrift store, and Desmond had borrowed a suit from his older brother, and they'd met outside the gym entrance looking awkward and nervous, and somehow exactly right. They'd danced, badly, neither of them had any rhythm, and had talked and had stolen moments outside when the gym got too hot and too loud. Under the January stars, with music muffled by gym walls and other couples scattered across the courtyard, Desmond had kissed her for the first time. It had been gentle and tentative and perfect in its imperfection. When they'd pulled apart, Marlowe had found herself smiling in a way that felt unfamiliar, like her face had forgotten how to express uncomplicated happiness, and was remembering. "I really like you," Desmond had said. "Not despite everything that happened, because of who you are through all of it. You're the bravest person I've ever met." "I'm not brave," Marlowe had said. "I was just tired of being scared." Same thing, sometimes. The rest of the school year had passed in what felt like accelerated time. February to June, compressing into a sequence of studying for finals, navigating the last few months of senior year, making decisions about what came next. Marlowe had applied to colleges, had written an essay about identity and transformation that had probably been too honest, but that felt necessary. She'd been accepted to 3 universities with decent scholarships, had chosen the one in-state that would let her stay close to her mother while still getting distance from Roosevelt. Desmond had gotten his basketball scholarship to a Division II school upstate. They'd talked about the logistics of staying together, about whether long distance would work, about whether they should even try. In the end, they decided to see what happened. No promises, no pressure, just an understanding that they'd been through something significant together, and that was worth seeing where it led. On the last day of school, Marlowe had walked through Roosevelt's halls for the final time. The building looked different now, or maybe she looked different, and that changed how she saw everything. The same lockers, the same fluorescent lights, the same institutional architecture. But the atmosphere had shifted. Students greeted her as she passed. Teachers smiled. The casual cruelty that had characterized so much of the year had dampened into something more manageable. She'd run into Vanessa in the parking lot after final exams. They'd both stopped uncertain, the weight of everything that had happened sitting between them like a physical presence. "Hey," Vanessa had said quietly. "Hey." "So, we made it." "Yeah." An awkward pause. Then Vanessa had spoken again. "I'm going to California for college, UC Santa Barbara. Figured maybe distance would be good. Fresh start, you know." "That makes sense." "I'm not going to pretend we're friends now or anything. I know we're not. But I wanted to say, you changed my life in a weird, complicated way. Probably saved it, actually. So, thank you, I guess." Marlowe had looked at her, this person who'd made months of her life miserable, who'd pushed her to the breaking point, who'd inadvertently forced her to reclaim a part of herself she'd been trying to abandon. "You changed mine too," she'd said honestly. "Not how you intended." "But you did." Vanessa had nodded, managed a small smile, and walked away. Marlowe had watched her go and felt something settle in her chest. Not forgiveness exactly. It was too soon for that, might always be too soon. But understanding, maybe. Recognition that people were complicated, that cruelty often came from pain, and that everyone was capable of change if they chose it. Desmond had been waiting by his car, and they'd driven to their usual spot in the courtyard. Except it was evening now, golden hour light slanting through the trees, and they'd been alone. They'd sat on the low wall where they'd had so many lunches, where they'd built the foundation of something that had sustained Marlowe through the worst months. "What are you thinking about?" Desmond had asked. "Everything. How different I am from September. How different the school is. Whether any of it mattered." It mattered. He'd taken her hand, twining their fingers together. "You stood up to someone who needed to be stood up to. You showed people that being quiet doesn't mean being weak. You changed the culture here in ways that are going to ripple out long after we're gone. I just wanted to survive the year." "You did more than survive. You won." Marlowe had thought about that word. Won. It didn't feel like winning exactly. Winning implied competition, implied taking something from someone else. What she'd done was different. She'd reclaimed herself, had drawn a boundary and defended it, had shown mercy when revenge would have been easier, had changed not just her situation, but potentially the situations of other students who'd been watching, who'd seen what was possible when you refused to stay a victim. "I think maybe we both won," she'd said. "Vanessa too, in a weird way. She gets a chance now to be better. That's a kind of winning. You're a lot more generous than I'd be." "I'm not generous. I'm just tired of being angry, tired of holding on to things that hurt me." She apologized. "She's trying to change, that's enough." They'd stayed there until the sun had set completely, until the school security guard had gently told them they needed to leave, until the June evening had turned into night. And as Marlowe had walked to Desmond's car, she'd looked back at Roosevelt High School one last time. The building sat quiet now, empty of students, just a structure of brick and glass, and the accumulated history of everyone who'd ever walked its halls. It had been the site of some of the worst moments of her life and some of the most transformative. She'd arrived in September trying to be invisible, trying to hide every dangerous part of herself, convinced that survival meant making herself small. She was leaving in June, having learned a different truth. Survival sometimes meant standing tall, taking up space, refusing to let other people's cruelty define your existence. She thought about Vanessa, about the note that still sat in her backpack, about the complicated reality that someone could hurt you terribly and still be a person worthy of the chance to change. She thought about all the students she'd never know who might find themselves in similar situations, who might remember the story of the quiet girl who'd finally stopped being quiet and who'd won through restraint rather than revenge. She thought about Master Chen, about her father, who'd first brought her to that dojo when she was 9, about her mother who'd been terrified that training her daughter to fight meant creating someone who'd always fight. She thought about mercy and boundaries, and the difference between having power and abusing it. She thought about how the truest strength wasn't in being able to hurt people, it was in being able to hurt them but choosing not to. How the hardest victory wasn't defeating an opponent, it was defeating the part of yourself that wanted to be cruel, wanted revenge, wanted to become the thing you hated. In the car, Desmond started the engine. "Where to?" "Home," Marlowe said, then smiled, realized how good it felt to say that word without fear. Home is good. They drove through evening streets, past stores and houses, and all the ordinary architecture of a life lived in this small city that Marlowe had been ready to hate, but had learned to exist in. She'd arrived with her past hidden like a weapon in a locked box, convinced that keeping it secret was the only way to stay safe. She was leaving with that box opened, the weapon acknowledged and controlled, the secret revealed, but in a way that had given her back her power, rather than making her dangerous. She'd learned in these months at Roosevelt what her father had been trying to teach her when he'd first brought her to Master Chen, that martial arts weren't about fighting, they were about understanding. Understanding your body, understanding space and timing and leverage, understanding how to defend without destroying, how to win without brutality, and most importantly, understanding that the goal of all that training wasn't to hurt people, it was to never have to hurt them, to be so clearly capable that you never needed to prove it. "You're quiet," Desmond observed, "just thinking about what comes next." "College. New city for me, new campus for you, trying to figure out this thing between us." "Yeah," she squeezed his hand. "I'm ready for it, though. All of it. Whatever happens." And she was. Ready in a way she hadn't been in September, when she'd walked into Roosevelt carrying the weight of Phoenix and promises and a past she'd been desperate to leave behind. She'd learned you couldn't leave your past behind. It was always there, part of who you were. The question was whether you let it control you, or whether you integrated it, used it, allowed it to inform the person you became. The hair that Vanessa had cut had grown back a few inches, though Marlowe had decided to keep it short. She'd liked how it looked, how it felt, how it changed the shape of her face into something stronger, physical proof that sometimes what someone meant as destruction could become transformation. She'd survived the destruction. She'd become something different through it. And she'd done it without losing her humanity, without becoming cruel, without betraying the promise she'd made to her father's memory. She'd defended herself when she had to, had shown mercy when she could, had been both the weapon and the person choosing not to use it. And in that balance, in that tension between capability and restraint, she'd found something like peace. Not perfect peace. The world was too complicated for that. But the kind of peace that came from knowing yourself completely, from integrating all the parts you'd tried to hide, from standing tall and taking up space and refusing to apologize for existing. As they pulled up to her apartment building, Desmond turned to her. "Hey, Marlo? Yeah. I'm really glad I sat next to you in AP Lit. I'm really glad I got to know you. All of you." She leaned over and kissed him, gentle and grateful. "Me too, Des. Me too." Inside, her mother was home for once, sitting at the kitchen table with paperwork spread out. She looked up when Marlo came in, and something in her expression softened. "Last day?" "Last day. How do you feel?" Marlo thought about the question, gave it the weight it deserved. "Good," she finally said. "Different than I expected to feel, but good. Your father would be proud of you. How you handled everything this year, how you stayed true to what he taught you." "Thanks, Mom." Marlo hesitated, then added, "I'm sorry I scared you. In Phoenix, and then worrying you'd see the same thing happen here." Her mother stood, came around the table, pulled Marlo into a hug. "You have nothing to apologize for. You defended yourself. You defended me. You did exactly what you needed to do both times. I was scared because the world isn't always fair to people who refuse to be victims. But you navigated it, and I'm proud of you, and your father would be proud too." They stood there for a long moment, mother and daughter, holding on to each other in the quiet apartment, while outside the June evening settled into comfortable darkness. Marlo felt the tension she'd been carrying for months, for years maybe, finally release from her shoulders. She'd survived Roosevelt High School, had survived Vanessa Keller and the casual cruelty of adolescent social dynamics and the particular horror of being targeted simply for existing. She'd survived by being strong when she needed to be, and merciful when she could be. By holding on to her humanity even when it would have been easier to let it go. By understanding that true victory wasn't about dominating your opponent, it was about staying true to yourself in the face of pressure to be something you weren't. She'd arrived at Roosevelt hiding. She was leaving visible, acknowledged, understood. And while that visibility had come at a cost, while there were scars both physical and psychological that she'd carry forward, she'd also gained something invaluable, proof that she could stand up for herself without losing herself in the process. In her room later, unpacking her backpack from the last day, Marlo found Vanessa's note again. She read it one more time, then tucked it into a box of things she'd keep from this year. Not because she wanted to remember the pain, but because she wanted to remember the transformation, wanted proof that people could change, that mercy could matter, that choosing not to be cruel was a victory in itself. She looked at herself in the mirror. Same face, same eyes, same person who'd walked through Roosevelt's doors 9 months ago. Except not the same at all. Stronger now, more integrated. No longer hiding parts of herself out of fear, no longer pretending to be helpless when she knew exactly what she was capable of. She thought about the other students still at Roosevelt, the ones who'd been watching her journey, thought about the message she'd inadvertently sent, that you didn't have to accept being bullied, that you could stand up for yourself, that having the power to hurt someone and choosing not to was the highest form of strength. Maybe some of them would remember. Maybe when they faced their own Vanessas, they'd find their own ways to draw boundaries and defend them. And maybe Vanessa, in California, would actually become the person she was trying to be, would learn that her father's money couldn't buy her identity, that real power came from character rather than cruelty, would understand, eventually, that the greatest gift Marlowe had given her wasn't the beating she could have delivered. It was the mercy she'd chosen instead. Marlowe lay in bed that night, listening to the ordinary sounds of her apartment building, thinking about the future. College in the fall, new people, new challenges, new opportunities to define herself. She wouldn't hide her training anymore. That lesson had been learned thoroughly, but she wouldn't advertise it either. It was just part of who she was, integrated seamlessly with everything else. She thought about Desmond, about their uncertain future, about whether they'd last through college, or whether they'd drift apart as people did. Whatever happened, she'd be grateful for what he'd given her: kindness when she'd needed it, support when she'd been alone, and proof that not everyone was cruel, that there were good people in the world worth fighting to protect. She thought about Master Chen, wondered if he'd heard about what happened, if the martial arts community was small enough that word had traveled. She should call him, she decided. Thank him not just for the techniques, but for the philosophy behind them, for teaching her that the point of all that training was to never have to use it. That the ultimate goal was peace, but peace backed by the absolute certainty that you could defend yourself if necessary. As sleep pulled her under, Marlowe's last conscious thought was simple and profound. She'd survived. More than survived. She'd transformed, had taken the worst months of her life and used them to become someone she was genuinely proud to be. Someone who could be both strong and gentle, both capable and kind, both a warrior and a person who chose peace whenever possible. She'd stood up to her bullies, not by becoming like them, not by embracing cruelty or revenge, but by simply refusing to be a victim anymore, by drawing a line and defending it, by showing mercy when vengeance would have been easier, by proving that true strength wasn't about domination, it was about restraint, about being powerful enough that you never needed to prove it. And in that understanding, in that balance between capability and humanity, Marlowe had found something that would sustain her far beyond high school, far beyond this small city, far into whatever future she chose to create. She'd found herself, whole and integrated and unafraid, ready for whatever came next, knowing that she could handle it, that she'd always been able to handle it, that strength had always been there inside her, waiting for the moment when she'd finally stop hiding and step into her full existence. She was Marlowe Crane. She'd been bullied and had fought back and had won by showing mercy. She'd been cut and had grown back stronger. She'd been tested and had proven, to herself more than anyone, that she was exactly as strong as she needed to be. No more, no less. Just right. And that, finally, was enough.